I remember when they were at the old campus where they had the trailers over by the old high school.
One of the questions they asked was, well, how big was the school? And I said 146, and somebody said 146 faculty? I said, no, students. They couldn't hardly visualize a college with 146 students. We soon had an enrollment that was too big for the trailers and the administration building, so we had to rent some of the prominent buildings' homes in town. And there was a problem with wasps flying around, insects. They'd give us a can of wasp spray to go over there and teach a class.
John Gray worked for Island Creek Coal as a vice president, and he was extremely interested in education.
They also had a white marble model on a table that they carried around and looked at, and we were all expecting this beautiful, shining white building, and so it wasn't at all what we expected.
You just turned on this little country dirt road and bounced all the way out to the college.
This building won an architectural award because it looked like it was part of the environment. It was like between two hills.
I remember people in the community talking about that building is not attractive, it's ugly, and they didn't like it, and why would they design a building like that in a hole between two hills?
In time, the block pulled away from the building and the windows became loose. So at that point, they had to brick the building.
Dr. Massey called me in the office, and he had this big camera, Topcon, and he said, I'd like for you to take some pictures of things that happen around campus here and so on. And this fella here, that's Mr. Charles McDowell. There were two or three girls from Muhlenberg County that used to just have a big time with him. And he'd come into the student lounge, and they'd say, well, it's good to see you today, Mr. McDowell. And he'd laugh and say, well, it's good to see you too. Now, the reason that's funny, he's blind.
Basically, Loman Trover decided if we were going to have a rural health center here, you couldn't have one unless you had people to work there. So he founded this campus as well as working with Madisonville Community College.
We had a basketball team in 1973. No cheerleaders, but pretty good basketball team. They played the two Job Corps teams here in the area and probably played some other small colleges.
And then there's the legend of they were playing at the Job Corps, and Stan left the van out front and went in, and when he came out, the van was gone. Someone had taken the van. I think he left it running, and somebody took the van, and they had to find the van, and how panicked they were. I mean, it's a great story, and Stan loved to tell it.
It seems like the computer class may have been called data processing. That was really all they had. And there were these huge box computers. It was really strange.
A lot of our computers we bought from Radio Shack.
On the first floor where the bookstore is now was like the student center, and it was just some tables, vending machines, and that was the place where people gathered in between classes, and it was a very small area. We had the student center, that was the auditorium, so everything was done in the auditorium. Graduation ceremonies were in the auditorium.
And that's where the student center is.
Yes. Mm-hmm. They had ping pong tables, and the curtains were so 70s. They were blue and green and white checked. Yeah. And behind the auditorium there was a back porch. It's back there where May Wright and Connie Harrelson are, and that area was a screened-in back porch.
And then on the other side of the wall was a smaller room where we had faculty meetings. I guess there were about 20 of us in there, 20 or 25 of us in there, and then we went through this big thing that there was this crisis for energy, and you had to turn off all the electrical things everywhere. And Miss Coble, who was head of the nursing program, said when they turn off the pinball machines, I will unplug my coffee pot. Dr. Massey, the first president of Madisonville Community College.
But in 1970, there were 5 faculty members hired. Myself, Linda Thomas, Jesse Nutt, Clyde Watkins, and E.E. Barnes.
I believe Joe Gooch and Joanna Brown are the 2 employees that were here when I came as a student that are still working here at the college.
That's Linda Thomas. We had a faculty member here that really liked her that called her baby legs behind her back. But anyway, that's Stan Lewis, a legend at the college, would from time to time take money out of his own pocket and give to students. Stan couldn't tell you anything unless he was just almost laughing. He had just a great personal way about him.
I decided after a few years that I was going to be here as long as possible because, for one thing, the teaching environment was always very good, and I have not had any better teaching experience anywhere else that I remember. There was always talk that we would be converted into a 4-year campus, but the prevailing mood was that, well, if we did that, we couldn't be a community college anymore. So we stayed at community college, and then we've added on things like the 2+2 program and Murray representation and things like that.
It's changed so much from then. If you lived out of town for years and you came back and said, well, I went to school at MCC in 1973 and I want to go out and see the college, you wouldn't recognize it from what it is now.
Well, if you try to imagine what the college would be like in 1970, if you picture a tree that you just planted, or just a little sprout of a tree, if you planted in 1970, that tree would be 40 years old. You know, it'd have 40 growth rings. It'd have 40 growth rings on that tree today, and it'd be a pretty sizable tree. So if you started taking away those growth rings, well, then you'd have to take away this new building out here, and then you'd take away the Glima Mars Center, and then take away the library, and take away the roof addition, and you start peeling off those rings. Eventually you'd have to peel away that building, the John H. Gray building, and then you'd be back to the trailers and the administration building, and you'd be back to your little tiny sprout of a tree. Because 40 years has made, of course, a phenomenal difference.